afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to What the Why with Barbara Ann on RVN Television. If you haven't seen us before, our show features conversations with diverse leaders from all walks of life about why they do what they do and how they figured things out. Maybe you're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, or you feel stuck and you want to get unstuck, whether that's in your life, your business, or even your career. All of our guests have something in common with you. At some point in their lives, they weren't exactly sure what direction they were headed, and they decided to do something about it, and today is no exception. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lynn Yaffe, Chairman and CEO of EPR Technologies Incorporated, a biomedical startup company that spun out of the Yaffe Center for Resuscitation Research at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Lynn and the company are dedicated to saving lives when standard cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR, fails by inducing rapid, profound hypothermia, followed by delayed resuscitation. It's going to make a lot more sense later when we explain all these sciencey words. Lynn completed undergraduate education at the Johns Hopkins University School of Arts and Sciences, majoring in biophysics, and he received his medical doctor degree, or MD, from the University of Maryland School of Medicine. He also completed pathology and research postgraduate training at Columbia University with additional molecular biology research experience at the Roche Institute of Molecular Biology. He's also a veteran. During a career in the U.S. Navy, he worked at the Naval Medical Research Institute, the Naval Medical Research and Development Command, the Naval Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, and the Pentagon, always with research and program emphasis in combat casualty care. He was instrumental in the development of the concept of EPR during research and development work at the Yaffe Center of Resuscitation Research. His knowledge with regard to EPR's emergency life-saving utility and potential applications in resuscitation for both civilian and military sectors is incomparable. Just the past decade, he's been actively involved in research and development programs related to patient casualty monitoring strategies, emergency hypothermia and rapid cooling techniques for point-of-injury care to induce profound cooling and temporary suspended animation. Again, we're going to cover this science stuff. And semi-automated or to automated AI-powered what's called rapid vessel access techniques for therapeutic hypothermia, and a range of automated needle and catheter guidance and placement technologies, things that currently, to this day, are still mostly done manually, as evidenced in a recent medical show on ABC television. Lynn has over 50 scientific publications in peer-reviewed medical literature, as well as several patents related to emergency medical techniques and devices. I have been looking forward to this conversation with him since we first talked back in December of 2023. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lynn Yaffe of EPR Technologies Incorporated to our show via Zoom. So, yay! Welcome, 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 welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And truly,
with you.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. And
I'm delighted.
And as you know, and as all of our viewers know, after I go through, and your bio is, I mean, this is just a small fraction of your achievements, a very 10,000 foot overview. But we don't always know what we wanted to be when we were growing up and whether that was what we were going to end up being in life. So what did young Lynn Yaffe want to be when you were growing up?
Well, I always wanted to be involved in some sort of research endeavor. And I grew up in Baltimore, and I went to, at that time, all-male math science high school called the Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, or Poly for short. It was a public all-male high school back in those days, and science was emphasized, and so it just further nurtured my interest in research. And of course, at Johns Hopkins in biophysics, I was always involved in research. Back in those days, I worked at was the Rosewood State Hospital outside of Baltimore for severely mentally handicapped individuals. I worked in a lab there. I don't think that institute is around anymore. They manage those severely mentally disabled individuals more humanely now. But that nurtured my interest, and continued at Hopkins, and then decided to go to medical school, and at Columbia worked, as you said, at Roche Institute of Molecular Biology. I had obligated service in the Navy at the end of the Vietnam War in order to finish my residency before being drafted. It was called the Berry Plan, after Senator Berry, and so I signed up for that. And the war came to an end, but I still had obligated service in the Navy. So I went to the Naval Medical Research Institute, which is across the street from NIH, which is where the National Military Medical Center is, the combined Navy, Walter Reed Army Medical Center. And so I was what was called a Beltway sailor for many years, that I toured some ships when they were in dock, but never was deployed to sea. So I stayed within the Beltway, always involved in R&D. And when I was a program manager, about the second half of my stay in the Navy, there was always the military problem that it may be interesting to know that approximately 80% of U.S. military killed in action die from massive bleeding, massive hemorrhage, before anything can be done to save them. You know, this is internal bleeding, rapid extremity bleeding, where a tourniquet can't get on fast enough, and they lose so much blood that they go into cardiac arrest. It's called exsanguination cardiac arrest. And even if a paramedic gets to the scene very quickly, there's nothing you can do. You can't do cardiopulmonary resuscitation. There's not enough blood circulating to support your vital organs. So 80% die of that. The other 20% roughly die from massive head injuries, and obviously nothing can be done in those very severe head injury cases. So the military, both the Navy and the Army, were interested in solutions. And at a meeting I attended, an Army meeting that was sort of humorously called the Lazarus meeting, what could be done to resurrect those individuals, I met Dr. Peter Saffer. And as you mentioned, the Saffer Center for Resuscitation Research was named after Peter Saffer. And I worked with Peter Saffer from about 1995 until his death in 2003. Now, Dr. Saffer, he's considered the father of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. He invented mouth-to-mouth. I won't go into the whole history, but there was a time when people would do arm raises and nothing adequately worked. He invented mouth-to-mouth, perfected it with and improved on chest compressions, and really went around the world adopting, to have people adopt the new techniques for CPR. And obviously, indirectly, he's responsible for saving hundreds of thousands or millions of lives over the years. When he did that original work in the early 60s, late 1950, early 60s, it was a different time. There was no 911 to call for an emergency. If people had an emergency, they would call the police department. And then maybe they'd be driven by an ambulance service to a hospital. But there was no such thing as a paramedic with any capability. They were just ambulance drivers. So Dr. Saffer put together the first paramedic service in Pittsburgh. And the military would call upon him. It was very interesting. It was called Freedom House. And Dr. Saffer took a group of unemployed African Americans and some orderlies from the hospital. They were African Americans. And he trained them to be the first paramedics in the world. And many of those early individuals, they went to other cities to start paramedic services. So That's the history of Dr. Saffer. So with what the military was interested in, we convinced Dr. Saffer to work on how can you save those 80% of military casualties that die because of massive hemorrhage. And he suggested, because of prior work that he had done in hypothermia, he said, don't worry about resuscitating those people. Preserve them by rapid, profound hypothermia. Now, this is not freezing. This is just very cold, where you would take a person down to 10 degrees centigrade, 10 degrees Celsius, or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And at that low, cold temperature, you don't need to breathe. You don't need oxygen. Your heart's not beating. You essentially appear dead. But there's still cellular life sort of that's preserved. And you can stay that way for, let's say, 3 to 4 hours. Currently, we keep the limit at 3 hours for our clinical trial that the FDA approved that's ongoing at Maryland Shock Trauma. So Dr. Saffer started those techniques, and he deserves all the credit. And then people who worked in his lab after he died in 2003, at about 79 years old he was, they continued working on the details in pigs and rats and large animals, and eventually got to the point where we were able to convince the FDA to allow us to do a clinical trial. All of the basic research and the animal studies, as well as the clinical trial that's ongoing, has been funded by the U.S. Army. So it's really taxpayer-funded research, because the military has a keen interest in saving the lives of those servicemen and women who might be killed in action. Now, the military won't pay for commercialization of products, even though they're interested in that. So the company was spun out of the University of Pittsburgh, and I and others have been working on, securing investment funds as the clinical trial is ongoing, refining the techniques and the equipment that's needed, and the use of artificial intelligence to monitor what's going on, and it all looks very promising. And for civilians, the severe trauma from automobile accidents or gunshot wounds, now in this day and age, unfortunately, one of the major killers of people under the age of 18 is gunshot wounds. Yeah. And frequently from automobile accidents or gunshot wounds, the people can bleed sufficiently, like a military casualty, that when the paramedics get there, they cannot be resuscitated. Mouth to mouth, there's not enough blood circulation, a defibrillator doesn't work. And so in one sense, EPR and rapid profound hypothermia is designed to give those trauma victims one more chance at survival by inducing rapid profound hypothermia within 5 to 6 minutes. Obviously, you need the equipment. The paramedics need to be trained to do it. You need the ice cold flush solutions that we use. And the appropriate catheters, everything that's done so you can, while you're doing CPR, with the little blood that's left in the body, raising the legs or whatever other techniques might be used, we can set up to very rapidly flush out the body with ice cold saline, and then there's no heartbeat, there's no breathing, and then you can transport them to the trauma center, do surgical repairs, and then give them whole blood back and rewarm them on cardiopulmonary bypass. And then the heart would spontaneously restart.
So hold that thought.
Anecdotally,
I'm sorry. No, that's all right, because believe it or not, we're already at the halfway mark. And so, but what's going to happen, our audience, we're going to explain some of this, because I'm following it. I was a bio major. A lot of you have had science. And if you watch shows like The Good Doctor or even some movies, you've seen some of this. You've heard stories about people who drown in, seemingly drowned in cold water, but the colder the water, the more likely resuscitation. So at the end of our break with our sponsors, you're actually going to see a video from EPR Technologies, and then we're going to resume our conversation with Dr. Lynn Yaffe. So please come back after this short commercial break.
trauma, sudden cardiac arrest, poisoning, snake bite, whatever the reason is, if you can't immediately resuscitate them, at some point you're going to give up. And instead of giving up, you would use EPR.
Welcome back to What the Why with Barbara Ann and today's very special guest, Dr. Lynn Yaffe of EPR Technologies. And you just saw a very brief video about EPR Technologies. Lynn, can you help us? So we've talked about a lot of the science aspects, but this is life-saving, life-changing technology. I mean, talk about a game changer. You've touched on a couple of the applications, and I know I had to cut you off because we were going to break, so I want to hear more. Like I said, I recently saw a show on a television station where they did a two-part heart transplant using parts from one healthy child to two different sick children, and they used this type of hypothermia, rapid hypothermia. I want to make sure I get this right. So
yes.
Feel free to take over and tell me what I saw.
Yes, in the United States, there are about 500 trauma deaths every day and about 1,500 cardiac arrest cases where CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, standard procedures don't work. So there's the possibility, of at least giving those individuals one more chance at survival. When paramedics would give up on CPR, I mean, they'll do it for 30, 40 minutes, whatever, give the victim as best chance as possible at survival. But instead of giving up and pronouncing the patient dead, one more chance, based on the situation, to induce profound hypothermia via EPR techniques. And then once they're cooled down, you can take them to the trauma center for surgical repairs and resuscitation. You know that anecdotally, everyone has probably heard of a healthy skier that gets covered in an avalanche, and they're lucky enough that the rescuers find them within a couple of hours, and those skiers are cooled down so quickly that it's like EPR. They go into profound hypothermia. And in some of those cases, there can be rewarmed and resuscitated. Now, obviously, we would be dealing with a trauma victim, not a healthy skier. But using profound hypothermia is not, provides the possibility of survival in those cases, even with children who might fall under a frozen a hole in a Great Lake in the middle of winter, and they drown. They cool down so fast that when the divers find them, in some circumstances, they can be resuscitated. So, hold in and of itself isn't a cause of death in a sense. It's a preservative step, at least for a few hours. It's sort of like, in the early days, Dr. Saffer called this suspended animation. But when we started with the FDA looking at the possibilities of a clinical trial, we changed it to EPR because suspended animation was too much science fiction, and we were trying to deal in reality. We chose EPR because we wanted to say, when CPR fails, try EPR. So we wanted to get a 3-letter. So we settled on emergency preservation and resuscitation. The techniques that are involved, obviously you have to, while you're doing, let's say, CPR on a victim, you want to gain access to the large arterial system, the vessels that come off of the heart. And you can do that either in the groin, with a femoral artery, you can do it in the arm, a brachial artery, you can do it on a carotid artery in the neck. So there are various points for rapid access, and we're engaged in all of those techniques. And once you have arterial access, you have to then pump in ice cold saline. And you do that very rapidly. It can be, as much as 5 liters a minute in order to cool the entire body down. Some techniques that we involve, obviously you want to cool the brain, is the most important organ to cool down. So you want to shunt our cold solution to the brain first, to the and then to the heart, the spinal cord, and then the other vital organs. I won't go into detail about all the techniques of doing that, but the trauma surgeons and the paramedics can be made adept at doing that. And so then when you have a patient that's cooled down in, let's say, 5 to 7 to 8 minutes at most, they're not bleeding anymore because their blood has been flushed out. Their heart's not beating. So they're just sort of like a very ice-cold individual. And then they're rushed to the trauma center. Maryland Shock Trauma in Baltimore is a premier trauma center. They can land helicopters on the roof, and there's an elevator right there to take them down to the trauma bay. And they service the tri-state area around Baltimore. Very effective. The chief trauma surgeon and director of Maryland Shock Trauma, Tom Scalia, is a strong advocate of EPR, and our trauma surgeon that's in charge of a clinical trial, Sam Tischerman, he's one of Dr. Saffer's proteges, and I worked with him at the Saffer Center, in the late 90s, and still obviously interact with him because he's doing the clinical trial for us. So once you have the patient cool and that they're a trauma center, and the surgeons essentially do whatever surgery they have to do to close all the wounds, and then the patient's intact again, then you use blood bank blood via a cardiopulmonary bypass machine, and then you drain out the ice cold saline that we gave them while you give them blood back at a cold temperature. And then once the blood is given back, then you start to rewarm the blood using cardiopulmonary bypass. So you slowly rewarm them, and when they get to normothermic temperature, maybe they get to around 34 or 35 degrees Celsius. And then the heart should start. If it doesn't spontaneously start, you can give it a little defibrillation. But usually the heart will spontaneously start. And sometimes you can keep the patient at what's called mild hypothermia for a day to take the stress off of the brain recovering and everything. And mild hypothermia at major medical centers is used for heart attack victims that are resuscitated by CPR but remain unconscious. So you can have a heart attack, have CPR, and you're fully recovered, and you spend some time in the hospital, but you may be pretty alert and whatnot. There are other patients who are resuscitated by CPR, but they remain unconscious. It's best to keep those people mildly hypothermia, which is just a few degrees below normal, and your heart can continue to beat just a few degrees below normal. If you cool the body too much, like below 33 degrees Celsius, your heart won't beat. And that's a problem, obviously. And our low temperatures are profound. Obviously, the heart's not beating. But once a patient is rewarmed, then you hope for the best and that they'll have a full recovery. Obviously, not enough patients have been done to really determine the long-term effects. But it'll probably mirror something like CPR. That not every patient that's resuscitated by CPR, let's say, returns 100% mentally intact. Maybe they've lost a few IQ points. It's hard to be sure. But, they're fully functional, go back to their regular work and whatnot. Sometimes, in some cases, a cardiac arrest patient may be resuscitated, but they never fully regain their normal mental status. And they essentially remain comatose. And those are very sad cases. So when you look at the spectrum of results from CPR, I imagine in our early days of EPR, once this is expanded to many trauma centers after the clinical trial, you'll probably see a spectrum of results too. Part of it may depend on how early do you do EPR? How long do you spend doing CPR in a trauma victim? So At what point should you say, well, we're not going to bring this person back by CPR? Let's do EPR to protect the brain as much as possible. Because during CPR, the goal is to get good oxygen delivery to the brain. Can you be certain of that in the field? So as time goes on, we may be able to do EPR earlier and earlier and not do prolonged CPR. If the patient doesn't come back, with 10 minutes of CPR and one or two defibrillations, maybe that's the time to do EPR to get better outcomes. So
and believe it or not,
things
Lynn,
move forward
Doctor,
over time, as everything does in medicine.
Yeah, and doctor, and speaking of time, believe it or not, we're at our time. But
I appreciate the time and letting me speak so long.
No, like I said, we're here to showcase your brilliance. And interestingly, the show is called What the Why, and even though we never actually said what's your why, it is obviously clear that your why is significantly improving the lives of people who otherwise probably would not.
Lives. And if people have an interest, they can go to our website at epr-technologies.com. Or if they want to see more things, they can go to YouTube, type in my name or EPR Technologies, and there's a lot of information there.
Which is perfect. That was going to be my last question, so thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
Mine too.
It's been a great pleasure.
So now, regarding our upcoming guests, you've seen a range, and they've include some of the most brilliant scientists in the world to local small business owners and entrepreneurs and athletes and other vets and people who've overcome the seemingly insurmountable. Bottom line is, you really don't want to miss what any of them have to say. And if you have missed any of our past episodes and you want to check them out, you can catch all of seasons 1, 2, and 3 to date on RVNTelevision.com's What the Why page, as well as on Roku. You have so many viewing choices these days, so thank you very much for watching our show, and please tell a friend or colleague about us. As a reminder, What the Why is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the RVN Television website, as well as on Roku. And also, please remember, whether you're looking to make changes in your life, no matter how big or small, please tune in for more conversations and educational opportunities with guests such as Dr. Lynn Yaffe, who overcame the seemingly scientifically impossible challenges of better ways to save people's lives. And you too can overcome whatever is seemingly insurmountable in your life to find your purpose and live it.